What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to BSing Sports. Bill is here with me as most of the time, and like we have advertised, for the last couple of weeks, Jim from Dumb Baseball and Other Stuff Guy on Twitter is here with us
Interesting
today.
Twitter name.
Yeah, it's a great Twitter name. It really catches the fans actually. However, with his name being Dumb Baseball and Other Things Guy, we're actually just going to talk about the other things today. We're not even going to talk about real sports today. We're here to talk about fantasy football. I happened to be scrolling Twitter one day, and I came across, a tweet you may like, and it had a bunch of, dynasty fantasy football rankings based on position with draft picks thrown in there. And I started checking them out, and I was like, this is intriguing. You could have host a whole show on it. And then I was like, ding, let me reach out to my guy and see if he wants to have a show on this. So, James, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm glad that you guys wanted to have me on. You want to talk some fantasy dynasty rankings in the football sphere. And yes, I am Dumb Baseball and Other Stuff Guy, and I just like to keep things light. And, even though my rankings go pretty in depth, as I think we'll go ahead and discuss, I'm also, a guy who says, I'm not that smart, and as deep as I go, they're probably all going to be wrong anyway. So take things with a grain of salt and go, this is for fun.
Yeah, well, the best thing about rankings is that they always change throughout the season anyway. But, I mean, I've gone over a few of yours. I got some stuff I want to talk about. Ryan obviously also wants to have some stuff to talk about. The first category I think we'll go through, Ryan, if you want to.
Yeah, we'll probably do quarterback first, the most probably, depending on your format, most or least important position in fantasy football. Actually, That's a very true statement. So
for the fans here, we're going to show you what James over here posted, and we're going to go not line by line, but pretty much what the research here says. So if you guys can see it, we've got the chart of the quarterbacks and the upcoming draft picks of where James has ranked them. So why don't you take it away for a few minutes there, James?
Yeah, again, these rankings are, very dependent on how your league format's set up. If you have a 6-point passing TD over a 4-point passing TD, they're going to shift dramatically. And, if you have passing bonuses for 200, 300, 400 yards, etc., things are going to move. So you always take any rankings, mine or anyone else's, with a solid amount of salt and go, well, what is this really saying? For what I put out, these are 4-point passing TDs, and it's not a super flex. So your league, you're assuming it's a 12-man. Possibly you can use these for a 10-man league, but you're not looking deep. And when you are looking past, position 12 for the quarterback, you're looking more so for upside versus stability. So that's why you see things like Tua being ranked relatively high. You see Hurts relatively high. You see Lance not as high as he probably is in my most recent rankings, but you see things of wanting to bet on high upside because the downside is going out and adding QB 14 or QB 15 off your waiver wire. And in a world where that person is Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, that's not the worst I crashed and burned with my selection. Whereas if you're in a super flex league, things matter entirely differently because you've got probably all 32 guys rostered. Maybe there's one or two floating out there who are just going to be a week or two starters, and you have to think of value completely differently. So ultimately, when it comes to quarterback, it's not as easy to just transfer rankings like you can for running back or wide receiver. There's a lot of fluctuation, and that's kind of how I built these rankings. Our 4-point passing TDs, 12-person league, and to just think what you would do in those leagues when you're looking at one-for-one value.
So two things immediately jumped out to the page on me when I looked at this chart was one, who is Logan Whiteside? Like, I know my players and whatnot. I've never even heard of that guy.
You haven't heard of him because he hardly ever plays. The reason he hardly ever plays is he was the backup to Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. He's an upcoming free agent who more than likely is probably going to find himself continuing to be the backup to Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. If he goes somewhere, it's extremely unlikely he becomes a starter, but it's also why he's ranked 100 overall. He's someone who, if you have insanely deep rosters like these are built for, you can throw him on your roster because should Tannehill get hurt, he's a guy who will start. And if he starts, I don't know, there's not a horrendous chance that he becomes somewhat viable. It's not very good either, but he's someone to at least have your name on. You saw Jake Fromm went from not being ranked to being ranked 98th simply because he was going to probably get an opportunity. We also knew that his opportunity was he probably was going to stink up the joint like he did. But having a little bit of something and a little bit of possibility is just to keep on your radar. So when things kind of hit the fan and Jake Fromm shows up, you can decide how much you hate him versus not knowing at all who he is.
So my second question to that was actually bringing up Tua. So you talked about upside and how you rank these players. Jalen Hurts being 2 spots behind Tua is interesting when you talk about upside because of Hurts's rushing upside versus Tua's. Do you want to explain how you rank that a little bit?
Yeah, first and foremost, I will say that the rankings we do have on screen are not my most recent drop. I dropped those 2 days ago, and in those rankings, Tua did slip, and Hurts is now ahead. That being said, I think they are both very comparable in ranking, and they can slide up and down either way. Do I think Hurts has a higher ceiling? Yes, he does, which is why he ultimately moved up in my most recent rankings. But you're trying to think about, what do you want with your quarterback and what do you want long term? Because unlike running back, unlike wide receiver, unlike tight end, quarterbacks are around for a very long time. They start for a very long time, and they're the head of a franchise for a very long time. In theory, Tua and Jalen will both be that, but I'm not so sure I believe that management in Philadelphia wants Jalen to be the guy. They've stuck with him, and he's been a very solid fantasy player and a very adequate real-life quarterback. I don't see any real issues there, but I don't see anything that says, oh, he's purely the guy, he's the next Kyler or anything like that. And a lot of what my analysis is kind of contrary to what a lot of people do is I don't rate talent. I don't go, oh, I think so-and-so is better than so-and-so because their deep ball is better or they have better footwork or anything like that. I'm looking to see what they're going to do based on their team around them because, as we all know, your team in football matters the most. You can have the most talent in the world, but if you get stuck on the Detroit Lions, you're still not going to be the greatest player in the world because that's your team.
Point in case, Matt Stafford.
Exactly. Matt Stafford, if he would have been drafted in Green Bay, he would be Aaron Rodgers. And if Aaron Rodgers was drafted in Detroit, he would be Matt Stafford. Both good players, but both totally different in terms of value and just overall thought process in fantasy and in real life. Likewise, where I'm going with this is I think Tua's got a great shot of remaining a starting quarterback in the league for quite some time. I think he has plenty of rushing upside. While it's not the same as Jalen by any means, whereas I think Jalen just has higher variance with a higher crash. And when you're looking at quarterback, I was thinking to go safer. Ultimately, I flip-flopped on that, so it is neck and neck. But that's generally where my thought process was when these rankings came out.
So another quarterback that you have on the list, relatively high for me, at number 14 on this. Again, I don't know if you've changed the list because I apologize. I didn't get the most updated one. But Desean Watson, give me your take on why he's sitting at 14 for you.
Yeah, he's sitting at 14 on this list, but there's also 5 or 6 rookie picks ahead of him. I can't even tell looking at it briefly, but I think it's 5 ahead of him, so I really have him as QB 9. Because those rookie picks are all rookie picks as opposed to just purely quarterbacks. And in a 12-man standard league, you're probably not taking a quarterback in the top 5. And the reason I have him there is simply that upside. If Watson shows up on the field next year, which is an if as opposed to a definite decision, he's going to perform. Prior to all of his terrible issues and his public coming out as a bad person and needing to have whatever comeuppance comes his way, he was an excellent football player, and by no means should anything that happened to him off-field take away from his football talent. When it comes to fantasy sports, you're buying football talent and you're buying stat lines, and Desean Watson is going to put up a great stat line when he's on the field. He was doing great things in Houston when their offense was more or less falling apart. They didn't really have a run game. He was quite all right. If he's going to get traded, he's going to likely get traded to a team that has some pieces now because no one's going to give up the farm to rebuild around him. That doesn't really make that much sense. So I'm buying his upside. I'm obviously buying it very high. He has fallen in my most recent rankings kind of for the same thought process that I had with Hurts, which is, yes, there's high upside, but there's also very high floor. And maybe I'd rather have a guy like Stafford ahead of him. But overall, the thought process behind Watson is you should be buying right now because say you buy him and things work out. Well, you've obviously netted a large profit. Say you buy and things don't work out. Well, he's already had a season on the sidelines. It'll be very easy to cut him next year if things don't come back, if he has a huge suspension, if he's forced out of the league, whatever it is. You are going to mature quicker to the final destination, whether that's good or bad. So that's why I like to buy him now because all of that time has already passed. Last offseason, I had him ranked lower because there was a high probability of the season he just wasn't going to play, and that's just lost time. Now that lost time is over, you're likely going to come to an end result, and I will take that risk at that position.
It's a fair take. I actually agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So my last question in regards to quarterbacks are: is there one name on this, two names really, but one name that you think can make the highest jump immediately, and one that will make the furthest fall immediately? Like, say, 31 comes to mind, Trey Lance. If he becomes the starter for the 49ers, how high does he jump? Because we know his rushing upside and his elite arm strength, ability to push the ball down the field. I know you don't get too much into the real life aspect of it, but say, Trey Lance or Garoppolo falls from 58 because of that. Two names, one for each.
Yeah, actually my answer is Trey Lance because in my most recent rankings, he jumps up from 31st to 16th. The reason he does is, sometimes you put together rankings and you just miss something. I completely misrepresented what I thought Jimmy Garoppolo's contract was. I thought he was a post-June 1st cut where they don't save any money. They save like $500K of his $28 million. And in reality, they save 27.5 of that 28 mil if they cut him. So he is very likely going to get the axe because that's top 6 in the league payment for a quarterback who's not top 6. And you just drafted one very high in the draft this past season. So suddenly Lance has a lot more value. And that was just a mistake by me because, we all make mistakes. So him going up is basically a certainty because it already has happened. Likewise, someone who could be going down, whispering around here, but I'd say Aaron Rodgers. I don't necessarily think him going to any new destination outside of Green Bay, it will be a net positive. Do I think he's going to leave Green Bay? No, but I think there's a real possibility that he does. And say he lands in Denver, that's great. But anywhere else, I'm not buying his sudden ability to just remain a star. He's already very old, and suddenly I'm hedging against what he's offering, and he falls into, Tom Brady territory where, yeah, he'll still probably be good in the current seasons, but how long is that going to last versus giving myself some sort of future outlook beyond 1 to 2 seasons max?
So strictly Rodgers falls because of his age, not because of his ability, regardless of whether he stays in Green Bay.
Correct. Yeah. He's going to fall. Just like Tom Brady falls. Yeah. He's not in anyone's top 12, and he's the greatest quarterback we've all ever seen. Why? Age is real, whether anyone, wants to really admit it or not, especially when it comes to skill positions. But eventually everyone will decline, and it will happen, and Rodgers and Brady will see it.
Cool. I'm done with the quarterback chart if you are, Bill.
I'm just running through it one more time to make sure I don't have any more questions. Actually, you know what? I'll go with John's while I'm thinking about it. Yeah. Our buddy John has this question for you, Jim. It says, could Mac Jones make a push-up?
Yeah, he could. Do I think he will? No. He seems to very much be the quote-unquote game manager. And while in reality he might have some good games here and there, what you're looking for in fantasy is someone who you can start with confidence against a weak defense or against a mediocre defense. I have no faith that Mac Jones will be very predictable when and where his bigger games will come, and therefore he's really not a viable starter. Sure, he might go up against an extremely poor defense and put up a solid game, but most quarterbacks on this list might do the same thing, and that's not really getting me to buy him, especially in the 12-man league. I see him as a person who just has a capped ceiling, someone who's going to go out there and perform well, but he's going to perform like Jimmy Garoppolo, who's had some big games in his career, but he's also never touched the top 12 because he's not that good. It's just kind of how it is. I know a lot of people in New England would very much beg to disagree and say Mac Jones might be, the next face of the NFL, and I'm not buying it. I just won't buy it, especially in fantasy world. He's not going to put up games and the consistency that you want out of your QB1 and a top 12 guy. Could he find himself maybe up a tier in that red range of 24 to 40? Yeah, that could happen. That's not at all impossible, but I'm not betting on it.
All right, so here I do have one question, and I'm more or less doing this specifically because you admitted that you're a Cleveland fan. Baker Mayfield, you got him down at 44, so that believes that you think that coming with the new draft there will be 43 quarterbacks in the NFL better than Baker Mayfield. So I've got a two-part question. One, is Baker the quarterback for the Browns next season? And two, do you think has the ability, if he's healthy, to jump back up into that 24 to 32 range?
Well, first off, the draft picks that are listed are draft picks across all positions. So it's not so much I think he's the 43rd best quarterback, because I
Okay.
don't. I think he's the 43rd best asset when you're looking at only quarterbacks and draft picks coming up in the 2022 draft for fantasy football. So he's got, I think, 18 picks ahead of him. So I'm really ranking him about 25th or so at quarterback, because a few of those picks will probably end up being rookie draft picks. So I think he's a bottom half of the league starter. I think he's had all of the opportunity you could really ask for as a starter by having multiple elite wide receiver weapons, the best running game in the league, great offensive line talent, and a great coaching staff and an adequate defense. You really can't ask for more than that, along with the amount of time Baker's had. And he's never proven to be consistent. Outside of his rookie season, where he was a fringe top 12 quarterback, he's never really been there. Do I think it's possible he somehow turns on the Jets late and leaves the team and becomes, the next Ryan Tannehill? Yeah, that's possible, but I'm not going to bet on that happening, because there's been far too many next Sam Bradfords and next other high-end picks who just kind of weren't that great. And, Baker certainly doesn't have the physical attributes that have you going, oh, well, he goes somewhere else, he's going to turn those on. He's always been an undersized, scrambly guy. He's consistently hurt, for whatever that means. We don't know how much that really affects his play, but basically he's an older Mac Jones to me. He's a guy who's just not going to go out there on the fantasy field and perform. So I really don't want to invest in him unless I have a deep, deep bench and I'm just picking up a starter.
So Ryan and I have talked about this in the past couple of weeks. My take on Baker Mayfield, and I just want to give you mine real quick. And mine's more of a real life thing rather than a fantasy football situation, is there's not a really strong quarterback draft class coming out right now. So Baker is probably going to get another shot to be the starter of the Browns next season, because he just falls in that category of, he hasn't done anything great, but there's nothing greater coming. So if that's the case, or if and when that's the case, as a Browns fan, does that make you optimistic for Baker Mayfield, or does that kind of like kick you down a notch?
As a Browns fan, as opposed to a fantasy analyst, it makes me go, I'm in for another season where, the Super Bowl is more or less a pipe dream. Things could fall into line perfectly and everything could just bounce our way, and we get that, and that'd be fantastic, and I would love that. But that's not a quarterback situation I want to bet on to win in the playoffs. I know it happened in 2020. I know, in 2017 or whatever, when he was a rookie, he looked like he could win playoff games. It's possible, but it's not something that has me excited. And I'd agree with you that he likely is probably still the quarterback, and we're headed towards an eventual divorce. Maybe we can pull off a trade for a guy like Desean Watson or Russell Wilson or something very outside the box like that. But that's probably also a pipe dream. And the all likelihood is we're just going to have the same team more or less out there next year as we kind of retool and get ready for the next QB, which I'll take as a Browns fan, but I'm not exactly excited and looking forward to it like I was heading into this year.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Like you and I talked about, before air, Baker is probably the only issue in Cleveland. Like you touched on, outstanding run game, outstanding offensive line. Kevin Stefanski, in his first year last year, really turned the team around. And he's had the weapons, Austin Hooper was signed. Jarvis Landry's been there his whole career. They brought in OBJ, who was an electric wide receiver in New York, regardless of how you feel about his on or off the field antics. He's had he's been in positions to succeed, and it hasn't been taken care of. I comp him more so to Drew Lock, personally. But
outside of draft capital, I don't really have that much of a complaint with that, to be frank.
They're the same type of quarterback, they have a little bit of, above average arm strength at best, some mobility, just big time fall on their face. Locke had Judy, had Sutton, or Judy for some time before he tore his ACL. Noah Fant's always been a good tight end. They've had a decent running game over the last couple of years, and they've always had an outstanding defense, and Drew Lock has found every way not to succeed. So
yeah, no complaints from me, unfortunately. That's definitely kind of how it feels, where you've had a lot of opportunity and not a lot of results, and changed my mind on the field, and then I will change my mind on what I think of you.
Yeah, I agree. But running backs.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Running backs. Here we come.
Thinnest position in fantasy football.
Again, Jim, I'm going to apologize. I probably have the charts from last week and not the ones you put out 2 days ago.
That's totally fine because I actually put out the running backs chart last night. So you're about 6 hours behind. So not expecting a big difference there. And relatively speaking, my running back chart doesn't really flip-flop that much. Although my main change is I just have decided that Saquon and CMC are a lot closer to that class below than to Jonathan Taylor, who is somehow gapping the field right now. It seems almost kind of ludicrous just how much more value he has than whoever's number 2 on your board. And, running back is just, takes one draft class and suddenly it goes from being, lots of riches to being kind of barren. Your RB6 or RB7, you're not feeling a ton of confidence with it, or at least in my eyes.
So my first question, in terms of the running back position and Dynasty Fantasy rankings, does Jonathan Taylor have the biggest gap as the number 1 at any position compared to his number 2?
I want to say that Patrick Mahomes is so much better, but that's probably more of a real life gap than it is a fantasy gap. In fantasy, yeah, Jonathan Taylor has that gap. I didn't move him up until probably too late, if I'm being frank. I had him as my 2 and CMC as the 1 for too long. And heading into last season, I was bullish on the fact that Taylor was going to get as much opportunity as he has. And, he's proven me wrong. And that's always been kind of what my issue was with him, is I just didn't know if he was necessarily going to get that volume to be the elite guy. And certainly he has. And you look behind him and you've got guys like DeAndre Swift, who's put up great numbers. He's in Detroit where he's going to get opportunity. And he's still kind of hurt sometimes. And he also isn't surrounded by other talent to make sure that offense just goes off and he keeps getting scores and whatnot. But somehow he's clearly in the top 5. You got a guy like Joe Mixon, who I've loved for a very long time, but he'll be 26 next year, and he's clearly in my top 5. It's a rough time out there, and Jonathan Taylor is the only person who's got the experience of looking great, youth, and just current top-end upside right now. Everyone else is just kind of like, well, they look like they could be pretty good.
Yeah, so I saw on Twitter, I think it was like earlier this morning or earlier this afternoon, people are looking at this chart right now are going, why is Derrick Henry so low on the list? And you had a great argument for one of the guys, and I'm not going to take it from you. I'm going to let you have it. Why do you have Derrick Henry so low on your list?
Yeah, the biggest thing, which is the thing that people don't want to admit, is he's going to be 28 next year. He's coming off of a season where he had a catastrophic injury. Certainly one that is recoverable. It's not like he tore his Achilles like a Cam Akers or anything like that. But he's a 28-year-old running back coming off of a bad injury. Well, we've seen 28-year-old running backs come back fine. We've seen Adrian Peterson. That's not the end of the world. But then look at the running situation there right now. D'Onta Foreman, Dontrell Hilliard, they're all performing very well. And why would you think that Derrick Henry is going to come back and be the volume monster that he was in his age 29 season, coming off of an injury, when replaceable running backs have stepped in and performed slightly worse than Derrick Henry? I see a definite scenario where Tennessee wants to hedge their bets and save Henry for the playoffs. And he's not that beast in the fantasy football season, which is the regular season. So you mix those in with the fact I keep saying the number 28, which is ancient in running back years, and you go, why do I want to invest heavily in this guy? I've been low on Henry for quite some time. He's actually moved up in my rankings slightly over the past year, and that's because just no one has really stepped up who was young this past season. It's been Jonathan Taylor, and that's about it. You've seen Javonte move up somewhat, but everyone else has really gotten hurt or just kind of underperformed. But even with all that said, Derrick Henry is going to depreciate at some time. I could be wrong. It might not be next year, but there are a lot of signs that next year is a very real possibility. And I don't want to invest in that at the running back position when it's hard to find consistent replacements. And if you're looking at this chart, you have the option of everyone else. So I would just pick somebody else who isn't rated as highly in your league as Derrick Henry is and just kind of move along. It's not the greatest answer that people want to hear, especially the built different crowd who say Derrick Henry is just a beast among boys in the NFL when that's just not true.
And it's not true amongst linebackers and defensive linemen and offensive linemen, but when you look at the running back game, Derrick Henry is a large man amongst the rest of them. Specifically in the running back class. And I understand where you're coming from, that he's not like a freak of nature in terms of like the linebackers that he's hitting and the linemen that he's running through.
That's exactly where I was pivoting to. Yes, he's bigger than the rest of his running backs, but the people who are hitting him are equally as big. So he's not exactly being built different when he hits a linebacker. He wins sometimes, which is awesome to watch, but overall, each one of ththose hits adds up the same. He's still going to be depreciating eventually.
It's worth noting, and Ryan points this out every time we get on a show about it. It's the same thing with Christian McCaffrey and why he's always injured. When you give a running back the ball 400 times a season, he's going to take a beating. And Henry has done exactly that the last 4 seasons since he's been in the NFL. He's just taken a beating year in and year out. I'm not surprised that it finally caught up to him. But I understand why he's so low on your chart. I just wanted you to explain it for the other people.
So my biggest question with this chart is, and I have shares of both of these players in Dynasty. However, I have them way closer, if not flip-flopped, in terms of who's in front of the other, and it's J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers. So you made your rankings based on half-point PPR, which is, kind of in the middle of, standard and PPR. Why the big disparity between the two? Because we've seen them both at times put up some very elite numbers in their rookie year. J.K. Dobbins averaged over 6 yards a carry and had a bunch of scoring opportunities, whereas Cam Akers coming down the stretch for the Rams once he started to take a stronghold on that lead role his rookie year and into the playoffs, and he just, dominated in touches and dominated in performance. Why the big disparity between the two who are both coming off, season-ending, very, potentially dangerous injuries in terms of their career?
Yeah, to me, the answer is relatively simple in that the injury to J.K. Dobbins is a standard injury that young football players generally come back from about the same. Sure, he could come back poorly, but in all likelihood, he will be fine. Whereas Cam Akers' injury, we've never seen a running back come back and perform well. Actually, the answer is D'Onta Foreman, who finally came back after not being very good for 4 or 5 years. Now, granted, Akers' talent level is never where D'Onta Foreman's is. He's always been better and always will be better, so he might come back stronger. But I'm not going to bet on a running back to come back from injury where I've never seen it happen before. I could be wrong, and things could be great, but
I have a follow-up on that then. You have James Robinson ranked higher than Cam Akers, and he had, if I'm not mistaken, the same Achilles injury. Does he not?
That is correct, and these rankings were published prior to James Robinson's devastating Achilles injury, and he has plummeted in since rankings. He's now down around running back 47, hanging out with Darrell Henderson and Chris Carson in the, hey, modern medicine is great category, but I'm not buying that he's just going to come back and be that playoff monster that we saw. Do I think Cam Akers is going to have the greatest Achilles injury recovery we've ever seen? I do. But I don't think that he's going to come back and be a volume monster. You don't want to hurt your asset. Just think of it from the Rams front office perspective. They've already gone through it with Todd Gurley. They've already run him into the ground. Could they do it with Cam Akers? Absolutely. But we've seen Sony Michel and Darrell Henderson perform very adequately. It's kind of the same argument as Derrick Henry. It's, why are you going to bring this guy back and run him into the ground in the regular season when the goal is to just get through the regular season to get to the playoffs, where last season, that's when you unleashed Cam Akers. I fully expect the same thing to happen, which is you'll see plenty of glimpses where Cam Akers might be excellent, but by and large, he's going to be a flex player who you like, and you go, why can't he get more touches? And the reason is they're going to be delicate with him. Maybe 2 years from now or 3 years from now, he's fully back and ready to go, but maybe he's also not, and also I'm not putting that much stock into 2 and 3 years from now because I want to win my title next year, and next year I just don't see it happening as much as I think all of Twitter is buzzing about him being activated and ready to go. I'm going to be taking the wait and see approach, and once I see him getting those volumes, then I'll adjust accordingly. I will not be preemptive here.
So you brought up a good point, actually, and I researched this a little while ago. Darrell Henderson is under contract through next year. So I think you brought up a good point in that next year they will probably split touches to give Cam Akers, the speed back into the game and whatnot. However, I think past next year you might if Akers, recovers well and sees that he can hold up the part-time, maybe a 55 or 60%, touch rate, because they did, expend high draft capital to get him. So they will probably, lean on him a little bit more than Henderson. However, I think after next season, if Akers performs well, then I think you could make the argument that next year, you'll put him in the top 15 or whatever the case may be. My second downside, more so on Dobbins, is one, Lamar Jackson's there, who is going to steal goal line carries relentlessly. And secondly, the Ravens the last couple of years have never committed to an RB1. Gus Edwards has always gotten his touches. Even Devontae Freeman this year hasn't gotten all the touches that we thought he would. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, Dobbins' ranking isn't so much that I'm a big Dobbins believer as much as what's behind him. You've got Antonio Gibson, who, if you want to bump him up above Dobbins, I don't really have any issues with that. It's one ranking, and I could understand flip-flopping the two. Then you've got David Montgomery, who I also like, but he's in a cesspool of a situation in Chicago.
Yes, he is.
And while he's performed adequately, he also has had plenty of his own injuries, and everyone and their mom thinks that he's going to get competition coming in here since Tariq Cohen never came in, and Damian Williams was junk, and Khalil Herbert's been average at best. People seem to think that he's going to get more competition, and I kind of agree with that, whether it's the form of a free agent or another mid-round running back. And then you've got Derrick Henry, who we've already hashed out as to why I'm not big on Derrick Henry. We got Josh Jacobs, who I also kind of like, but also what's there to say about Josh Jacobs that you're not saying about J.K. Dobbins? You're kind of entering a territory where none of these guys are really that optimistic. Yeah, Leonard Fournette looks great, and if he comes back to Tampa, he'll see a boost in his stock. But he also might not come back to Tampa. He might go and get one final paycheck and go into a situation where things are not great, but not horrible, but he's getting paid. Same things with the James Conner. You had the A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones situation where if you knew one of those was the clear lead back, yeah, they'd leap over at Dobbins, but we don't know. And it's probably going to be split carries as of this time. Maybe going ahead, they lean more on Dillon, but they seem to be adjusting kind of to an average 50-50 flow. And I'm listing a lot of the guys after him, and there's not a lot of, there's clearly that upside with person X. It's all kind of the same thing, which is running back is thin as heck right now. That's really what it is, as opposed to Dobbins being a clear-cut class above other people.
Makes sense. Yeah, so the last question I had with this, with the running backs chart specifically, Michael Carter. He clearly, once he regained form, got, I think it was 21 or 20 touches his last game with the Jets. I think it was 18 carries, couple of receptions. He seems to be the volume king in that backfield. Does that move him up from 39 at all? Because as we know, volume seems to be key in fantasy.
I did see him move up 6 rankings in my most recent one to around 33rd. And while I do have a lot of volatility in my most recent rankings, I kind of don't expect that to really change this offseason. I think he will float right around there, give or take whatever happens in free agency. And that's mainly because I don't believe Robert Saleh is going to just invest in 20 carries with him every single game. That's just not what I see happening. I think 15 to 20 touches is nice and good and quality, but that's kind of mostly his expected ceiling. I'm sure he'll have some variance games where he has great touches and great volume, and you are rewarded for that. But he'll also have some games where he doesn't get it. Game script moves differently. They don't run the ball at all, and he's at a 4-point game. And I think he's also just kind of capped like that. He's a good player. He's one of the better rookie running backs we've had this past season, but that's because most of the rookie running backs this past season were trash. And they're not very good. And it's kind of a situation where, yeah, would I like him as a flex? Yeah, he's a very nice flex. As an RB2, I'll accept it. I don't have any issues there. But beyond that, I just don't see his ceiling as very high. He seems to be a high floor, low ceiling, going to go in and get you a decent amount, but not do anything too spectacular.
Okay. Yeah, solid. Makes sense.
I'm good with the running backs. How about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm good with the running backs.
All right. I want to apologize again. I don't have your tight end chart up. I do have wide receivers, so we're going to move on to that.
Dang it, that's the one I wanted to talk about. I like Dawson Knox more than TJ Hawkinson.
I mean, we can still talk about it. I just don't have the rankings for everybody else to see. Yeah, you know what? Let's do tight ends. We'll do wide receivers last.
All right, cool. Yeah, Dawson Knox behind TJ Hawkinson. Why?
everyone is down on TJ Hawkinson because he's in Detroit. He has Jared Goff throwing to him, and no one likes Jared Goff. And Dawson Knox has been, frankly, excellent recently. But also, you look at his TD. I think he's averaging a TD on 11% of his catches.
I think he's this year's Robert Tonyan.
I agree with that somewhat. Last year, I was insanely low on Tonyan. I think he was like my tight end 23 or something heading into the offseason for those exact reasons, which his TD rate was extremely unsustainable. But Dawson Knox at 11, if you kick that down to, I don't know, a 5% TD rate or 6%, you're losing 2 or 3 TDs, which isn't like devastating towards his value. And I also don't necessarily see a new wide receiver coming in and replacing all of the older receivers they have there. Cole Beasley, not going to age well. Emmanuel Sanders, not going to age well. Yeah, Gabriel Davis is there being fine and could potentially replace one of them. Yeah, Isaiah McKenzie. They'll probably draft someone or bring in a free agent. But I don't really see volume necessarily going in the wrong direction for Dawson Knox. So he's going to see some TD regression, but I don't necessarily think he's going to see volume regression. I think he might see a little uptick in volume, especially just getting more rapport with Josh Allen. So I really like him, especially given his age and what we know about tight ends, which is if you can find any sort of solid fantasy play, you kind of want to jump at it. And Dawson Knox has a lot of stability in his situation. And unlike Robert Tonyan, he's not a street free agent. He has good draft capital. He's a solid blocker. He's going to be out there. And as long as Josh Allen is also out there, I want to invest in him. It's a cliff, in my opinion, after TJ Hawkinson and not before him. So I think the gap between the two is relatively sizable. But I like him best out of the non-top tier in my eyes.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm actually not very low on Hawkinson due to the fact that he's the only viable weapon in Detroit outside of DeAndre Swift. I just think all the things you said, Detroit has much more of a chance to draft a weapon that could take that volume away. If they decide that they want to up and draft Treylon Burks, that drastically changes TJ Hawkinson's outlook, in my opinion anyway. But yeah.
And I was just going to say, when you look at rebuilds, they take 2-3 years to complete when you're doing a big, nice, thorough rebuild. And we're already 1 year into Detroit's rebuild. You got to remember that. Jared Goff is not the guy they're trying to hang on to for a few years and then rebuild. They've already stripped it down to the bones. He'll be there maybe next year, but he still doesn't have any other weapons there today, of course.
Yeah, we've discussed that in past pods.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of future is bright with Hawkinson where the current production isn't there. And I think people just see the current production and go, ew, gross, and they're not really looking ahead.
Which is funny because I think he was tight end 4 until he got hurt. So the fact that, that nobody really projected him to be 1 or 2, that was pretty much Kelsey or Kelsey, Waller, Andrews, somewhere in that neighborhood. And people were still disgusted with Hawkinson. I saw it all over Twitter and all over Facebook. The fantasy feeds were just going nuts that this guy was actually meeting where he was projected to be. And they were still upset with it. But solid reasoning.
You got Kyle, on the one that I have that Ryan sent me a couple days ago. You've got Kyle Pitts sitting at number 4. His upside is, and he's very young. His upside is through the roof. You don't have him maybe moving up here in the very, very, very near future.
I haven't published my most recent ones, so you do have the most accurate ones. And he is at number 4, but he's behind the 101 pick, so he's really the number 3 overall tight end. And I also have him in the same tier, along with Mark Andrews, George Kittle, and TJ Hawkinson. And I really think that those guys are all kind of a coin flip. I know people don't want to admit that that's where Hawkinson is, but I kind of feel that he's higher than most people are on him. And that being said, these rankings were also indicative of the rest of the season fantasy outlook, and I didn't like the rest of Atlanta's schedule. And frankly, I thought if you needed to go make a move to win your league, I would flip Kyle Pitts for Mark Andrews. Now that the fantasy season is over and it's commenced, that's not how I feel anymore because you're not out here going to win your league. You're out here waiting for a full season. So Kyle Pitts is definitely in my top 2. I frankly haven't decided if he will vault up to number 1. I don't think he will. I think he's going to sit in number 2 behind Andrews. But yeah, things look great for Pitts. But also, he's got an aging Matt Ryan who's going to throw the ball a bunch and isn't going to get cut because of his contract situation. There's nothing else there because Calvin Ridley's not there, and he just put up a 1,000-yard season. While by all means that's excellent, the expectations for Pitts were kind of to put up a 1,000-yard season, and that's without having the obvious volume that he's had. So in a weird way, I feel like he's kind of underperformed what people wanted. But frankly, he's been excellent, and that's why he's still all the way up there. But I don't just see the sky as the limit with him. I don't think next year he's going to drop 1,600 yards and 9 touchdowns or something like that. He's going to perform about the same, which is still excellent, and he's going to have better TD variance than he had this year because I think he only had 1. So I like him a lot, but I'm always cautious when people project a rookie and they see what that rookie did, and they go, well, next year he's going to be better. Why? Because it's his second season. And you go, no, that doesn't always happen. People sometimes have their best season in their rookie year, or they regress a little bit in year 2, and then in year 3 they take an even bigger jump. And I'm not head over heels for Pitts like certain people are, and I think there needs to be a little bit of cautiousness with him because what's the real difference between Detroit and Atlanta right now? There's not a lot on those offenses. And we just saw what happened to Hawkinson, and everyone was saying the sky was falling in. Why are you expecting Pitts to be that much different? I'm expecting him to be different, but that much different? Slow your roll a little bit. Just remember how things operate in the NFL.
All right, fair enough.
Actually, I want to talk about Tim's question. Bring that back up. So who are you buying based on ceiling, Kelsey or Andrews?
Oh, I mean, it's Andrews, and it's not even really close. Kelsey's ceiling is gone. It's already happened. It was a beautiful ceiling, and I guess if his previous ceiling happens, I'll take that ceiling over Andrews. But looking forward, I think Kelsey's probably going to go down as the greatest tight end in the history of football. It's probably what he's going to do, especially in fantasy football. But if you look at the
Gronk,
I was going to say over Gronk if you get
or his predecessor,
Tony Gonzalez. Yeah, and the reason I say that is I'm giving Travis Kelce gigantic praise by saying that because I actually truly believe that, especially if you're looking at it through a fantasy football lens. But at the same time, if you look at the greatest post-age 32 seasons of all time, you're just looking at a list of Tony Gonzalez. That's what it is. And he put up some nice 800 and 900-yard seasons. That would be, I would think, the bar for Kelce to hit. And if Kelce puts up some nice 800 and 900-yard seasons, that's certainly not what peak Mark Andrews could do. He's aging out, and I think he will age very gracefully. Maybe he won't, but I think he will. But he's not an elite tight end. He wasn't an elite tight end coming into last year. I know everyone wanted him to be, but from a dynasty perspective, he was on the fringe. He had just come off 4 straight tight end 1 seasons. You don't project 4 more. That's not how it works. It's just not. If it happens, that's variance and dumb luck as opposed to projecting accurately. And you're going to project Kelce to be a quality TE1 in your league, but he's not the number 1 guy anymore. It's just not how it's going to happen, especially if Kansas City decides to actually add an offensive weapon, which they haven't done since they drafted Patrick Mahomes, it feels like. So they'll probably do that, and Kelce will go into being that reliable third down target to go get some 7-yard gains and 8-yard gains and not necessarily be the downfield target he once was.
Yeah, so my counter to that is if we're comparing him to Tony Gonzalez, because they are the same type of tight end, a big body that runs routes very well. For their size, they were athletic, but they're not particularly freaks of nature like a Kyle Pitts. My counter to that is Patrick Mahomes is throwing Travis Kelce the ball and not Trent Green and Alex Smith.
Yeah, and my counter back to that is I don't have one. That's a very good counter.
But and Andy Reid's also the head coach, so he'll scheme ways to get his best players open. But so that's other than that, I didn't really have any disparity with the tight end rankings. I actually agree with your Dawson Knox take. I comped him to Robert Tonyan of last year, who had obvious regression signs coming into this year. He wasn't going to catch 55 balls on 59 targets again and have 11 touchdowns. It just wasn't going to happen. So, but So do we want to move on to wide receivers, Bill?
We can. I don't have any more questions.
Yeah. So
actually, for me.
Yeah, going pretty smooth.
You don't have any questions for us, Jim? I feel like we're asking all the questions.
I mean, I'll probably have some questions for you once you give me some hot takes and tell me why I'm wrong so much. For the most part, you're agreeing with me, which I like a lot. But it's also I don't have a lot of discussion to go. Yeah, I agree with that. I like that take. That's good. I agree.
When I originally looked at your list and I saw how low Dallas Goddard was, I didn't really like it. But then I reminded myself there's 10 draft picks in front of there, and then the guys outside of Freiermuth, I do agree with, should probably be higher up on the list. Is part of the reason you got Goddard so low because we don't know the quarterback situation in Philadelphia?
Yeah, I know you guys are Philly fans, so there's probably some Philly fans listening to this, and they probably don't want to hear what I have to say, but I don't like the future of the franchise the next few years. I think that front office wants to overhaul the offense and put in their own future hopeful Patrick Mahomes regime, which is really nice. They've devoted a pick to Jalen Reagor. That hasn't worked out. They devoted a pick to Devonta Smith. That is pending, but probably leaning towards not being worth it. And they devoted a high pick to Jalen Hurts, and they don't like him for whatever reason. And unfortunately, in the world of business, the people who make the decisions are the people who make the decisions. So I don't really see how Goddard keeps up his volume, keeps up what's going on with the way that front office wants to run. They want to get themselves a stud receiver, and I think they're going to force their hand and get that. And especially if you see Hurts go, I don't think that tight end volume is going to remain. So I'm not very optimistic there. That's kind of why I'm not super optimistic on Hurts to begin with. It's just I kind of look at Philly and go, I'm out. Somebody else can deal with this. I don't really want to go there.
So two things. One, you're wrong. 90% of the people watching this actually agree with what you just said. Bill and I have gone back and forth on this on the show before. While Jalen Hurts has had a fantastic second half of the season and looks like he's growing as a quarterback, I'm still very weary of it. Coming into the season, I was not high on Jalen Hurts. Neither was Bill. We wanted to, he was calling for benching Hurts for about 18 weeks straight, going into the season. So
I was.
Yeah. So I can tell you, I promise you that we are not at all offended. We are not, some Jalen Hurts truthers. We're not going to stand up for that, stand up against y'all for that take. However, I think they did get a stud wide receiver. Devonta Smith, unfortunately, they are in a run-heavy offense. So, but do with that information what you will. Devonta Smith, if he saw the targets of a, Stephon Diggs, a Devontae Adams, or not in his rookie year, but, as he progresses, I think he's a good enough route runner with good enough hands that he could put up some very solid fantasy numbers. I think he does all the real life things very well that could translate into fantasy, with the exception right now of volume, but that's because he's in an offense that throws the ball 20 times a game if they're doing everything right. That being said, if we look back at the history of running quarterbacks, and Jalen Hurts is the one to stick it out in Philadelphia, Dallas Goddard is easily the biggest benefit from it. We look at Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. We look at Michael Vick and Algie Crumpler. Running quarterbacks love their tight ends, and Dallas Goddard, I believe, has to be bumped up in the rankings as long as Jalen Hurts is the quarterback there.
Yeah, and I agree with what Ryan just said there. Pretty much everything that he said there. Again, not a huge fan of Jalen Hurts. I was not high. It took me until like week 15 to kind of be like, okay, I'll like to watch what's going on for the rest of the season. I did call that they were going to make a run and make the playoffs. I just want to bring that up every podcast because I called it.
Timeout. I said in our preseason predictions they were going 10-7, and you said they were going 7-10.
I did say they were going 7-10, but then right before the Saints game, I made a call, and right now, other than the game that they lost, I'm dead on.
That's fair, and they shouldn't have lost that game.
They should not have lost that game. You're right. But having said that, Dallas Goddard, he's had, I think, 4 or 5 100-yard games since the Zach Ertz trade. So once he's been the number 1 tight end in Philadelphia, he's been one of the top 3 performing tight ends in the league. And to have him so low on the list kind of shocked me. And I reasoned with myself, and I said it's definitely because of Jalen Hurts. We don't know the quarterback situation. I'm not confident that Howie Roseman or Jeff Lurie, the GM and owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, do in fact like Jalen Hurts. I know they kept him over the Carson Wentz situation, but that was just an absolute nightmare last year. But no, for me, Dallas Goddard is higher up on the list. And even if we get a different quarterback in here, look what Gardner Minshew did with him in one game. You're talking 12 receptions, 122 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So I think Goddard has the ability to produce. It's the same thing as Ryan just said about Devonta Smith is volume. So for me, Goddard should be higher on the list.
However, I do respect and understand the fact that there is a little bit of concern there. I just don't think that there's enough concern that he should be as low as he is.
Yeah, and I think that that's all valid arguments, and there's anything wrong with them. And frankly, I know I'm in the minority in where I rank him, but I think it's just my concerns higher than your concern as to what this offense is going to look like in a year. And I'm a little more concerned that Jalen Hurts won't be the starter come 2022 than I think a lot of people are. And I might eat my words. In fact, it's probably likely that I'll eat my words. But right now, I'm kind of sticking to my guns there.
Yeah, I mean, you're saying you don't think Jalen Hurts will be, and again, not a Jalen Hurts fan, won't be the quarterback of the Eagles in 2022. Where do you see them going? He did just lead them to the playoffs. That's a legitimate question. I'm not like...
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a legitimate question in that, took him to the playoffs and things look great because he's in the playoffs, but also the whole regular season was, an up and down season.
Very high and low.
I frankly don't think that there's anything Jalen Hurts could have done to change management's opinion of Jalen Hurts. I think that that's predetermined, and they want to get themselves a traditional quarterback, and they will find themselves a way to do it. And it's not, frankly, fair to Jalen Hurts, and I think that Jalen Hurts, the real-life, real-world quarterback, is totally adequate at worst. And that said, management gets what they want because they are management and they're the deciders. Players don't always get what they want. And
fair enough. Let's move on to the wide receivers chart here. We're not rushing through it or anything, but we do have the Eagles game in about 25 minutes.
Oh wow, that is 25 minutes. Wow, these groups just get smaller and smaller.
I'm really sorry about that. Let me see. I can't make it any bigger.
It is 200 deep, so I do apologize.
I was just looking at that. I was like, that's probably why it's twice as small. I can barely read the names, so I can read them.
All right. Well, I mean, he's got the number one wide receiver in football is Justin Jefferson. I don't disagree with that at all.
Actually, I do.
Okay, fire away. Do you disagree because it's Kirk Cousins throwing him the football?
Jamar Chase, because he has a younger, more stable quarterback, whereas a couple years down the road, we have no idea who's throwing the ball for the Vikings.
That's fair.
Fair, but I don't really value that as an option because I think things could get better in Minnesota. And really 3 years down the road with a 26 or 27-year-old Justin Jefferson, whoever's throwing the ball, it's going to be okay. It's not going to be that bad.
Oh, I'm not saying Justin Jefferson needs to be wide receiver 15 because of his future outlook, but I think quarterback play, has a lot to do with how a receiver does in fantasy. And if we're talking outlook, Jamar Chase's is far better than Kirk Cousins Justin Jefferson's. I think to the point where they should probably be flip-flopped or at least tiered together. I see you have them tiered separately.
I guess that's why I'm coming in so hot on it is I don't even have them in the same tier. I have Jefferson hanging out by himself, and then I have Chase hanging out by himself. And then we have a tier of also very good receivers. But I just really don't think that there's really much that can stop Justin Jefferson, if I'm being frank. You might be right. And, 2 or 3 years from now, we are looking at Minnesota, and we've got a cesspool of a Baker Mayfield situation or something like that. But right now, I'm not really, frankly, that worried. And if that shows up, I can figure out a way out. But I want to buy Justin Jefferson 10 times out of 10 over Chase today.
Now, I have a question here I'm going to bring up, and I'm going to answer this for you really quick, Timmy. It's definitely Jamar Chase. While a lot of people might be able to argue that Waddle's having a great season, and he absolutely is, for the time being, Joe Burrow is Jamar Chase's quarterback, and Tua Tagovailoa is Jalen Waddle's quarterback. And for me, that's a very, very vast difference, and it's Jamar Chase all day.
I hesitate to agree, only because T. Higgins, which is probably the counter argument to my own argument of Chase should be ahead of Jefferson. T. Higgins is a very good receiver in his own outright, and will definitely have very good fantasy games and steal some targets away from Jamar Chase. Tyler Boyd, he's still only 27 years old, so he's got some time there in Cincinnati as well. Joe Mixon catches passes out of the backfield. There's a ton of mouths to feed in the Cincinnati offense, whereas you look around at the pass catchers, it's Mike Gesicki and Jalen Waddle, and that's really about it in terms of future outlook. You got Devontae Parker, who's aging, has been hurt, not productive. Preston Williams, I don't think I heard his name all year. There seems to be a lack of mouths to feed in Miami, and Jalen and Tua go way back.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
It's a
you
good
guys
take.
kind of gave actually my argument for both of them, which is that Ryan's argument on Chase is why Chase isn't the number one guy to me, because I think that defense is going to get better. And when that defense gets better, Cincinnati is going to be very good. And when Cincinnati is very good, their need to pass, like they passed this past season, will diminish. And therefore, while Chase will still be elite, he might not be seeing slightly as much volume as he saw this season. And that's why I can't put him at number one. Likewise, between him and Waddle, there's no comparison. It's Tua versus Burrow. Tua, while I have him plenty high in my quarterback rankings, he's not close to Burrow in terms of real life or fantasy production. And yes, that Jalen Waddle looked great this past season, but Devontae Parker was hurt for most of it. Will Fuller's been invisible, and I fully expect them to bring in more wide receiver weapons. So while Waddle has a potential higher ceiling, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be volume that goes to him. It's going to go to someone else currently probably not on that roster.
And to answer your second question, Tim, if you want to pull that up, Bill. Waddle, not close. Not even.
Waddle, not close. For all the things we just said about Dallas Goddard, Waddle, not close.
Yeah.
We're in agreement here.
Yeah, that's actually pretty far. However, I do have a question about Brandon Ayuk in these rankings. Trey Lance, being a big arm guy, wants to push the ball down the field, and that seems to be more Ayuk style, whereas Debo is a run after catch guy, which is why he seemed to fit better with Jimmy Garoppolo. Would you be willing to elevate Brandon Ayuk because of his potential ceiling with Trey Lance, more of a boomer bust type of player?
And then possibly even drop Debo Samuel because of the boomer bust for Trey Lance.
Well, you guys are very smart, because that is what is going to be happening when I release my next rankings. As like I said, I had just miscalculated the value of Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco. And because of that, you're going to see some Debo Samuel drop. Do I think Debo Samuel is still going to get his touches? I do. Do I think he's going to get as many touches? I do not. Do I think Ayuk is going to suddenly become a much more viable option? I do, and he will see some gains on these charts. I haven't actually finalized that, so I don't know exactly where he's sitting, but I know he will be moving up. I know Debo will be moving down, but they're not going to be moving significantly. But your intuition there and thinking about Trey Lance is spot on and couldn't be more correct.
So I see you have Laviska Shenault at 77. How does that change maybe with Trevor Lawrence's growth, or do you think it doesn't at all?
It's a really tough one, because Shenault was, atrocious this year, but everything in Jacksonville was atrocious. So you can't really, trash him that much. That said, Jamal Agnew and Laquan Treadwell, these people just kind of stepped up and took all of his options. And it really depends on what the new coaching staff kind of wants to do. And he looks like a total boom or bust guy for me. And, I kind of mentioned this earlier with quarterbacks, but I'll bring it up. I like him as a boomer bust guy because I don't like betting on rookies to boom or bust, because if they bust, you're kind of also going, well, they might boom soon. I don't know. Whereas a second-year guy like Shenault, or third-year guy almost, I don't even know where he is, but he's not a rookie. You're going to sit there and you're going to go, all right, it's been 3 weeks. He's either good or he can get off my roster, and you can cycle in someone new. So I kind of like taking a risk on him in drafts, especially in dynasty leagues, where right now his value is probably at an all-time low. Because if you miss, well, you missed on, a later round rookie who you're going to have to sit on anyways. I'd rather be able to take him, see what he does, and then cut him. But I think that there's a lot of question marks there, and frankly, I don't know the answers.
What do you think, speaking of Jacksonville receivers, what do you think DJ Chark's outlook is when he bounces back?
I mean, his outlook's good, but I do believe he is a free agent, which means he might not be back in Jacksonville.
He's got one more year.
Yeah.
Well, if that is the case, then I think that next year looks very good. And then the year after that, he might not be in Jacksonville, because I don't know too many players who want to stick around there unless they're getting paid hand over fist. And I don't think that front office is going to pay DJ Chark hand over fist. But next season, I don't see why his injury is going to prevent him from being potentially the number one weapon there. And I believe in Trevor Lawrence as much as his season's been horrible, that, give him some stability and not a crazy idiot running the team, and suddenly, he might look adequate.
Who has better future outlook, Calvin Ridley or Michael Thomas?
That's a tough question, because if you're saying who's going to have better overall remaining career stats, I'm going to take Calvin Ridley. but who has the higher variance to just never play again? I'm going to say Calvin Ridley. So I kind of rank them basically in the same spot because they're both two just massive question marks who you can't rely on. When Michael Thomas got hurt this past offseason, I was out promoting heavily, take whatever you can get. You don't know what's going on with this guy. He's already had some front office issues here. He's hurt. You're not going to bet on him coming back week 8 and just being a star. Get out. Now that you're out and everyone else in the world is out because no one's betting on him to be a star, maybe it's time to get back in because you don't really know what's going to happen and his price is going to be cheap. But, kind of like a Chenault in a way, week 3 or week 4 whether you've had a good investment or not. And if you have a bad investment, you can move along however you see fit.
So I have questions about 2 more players. With the recent explosion of Amon-Ra St. Brown,
that's the one I was going to ask.
Being old rankings, how has that changed your outlook on him?
I mean, he's gone up. I don't think he's going to leave that tier. He's definitely, leapfrogging Tyler Boyd and Devontae Parker and the Ridley and Michael Thomases of the world. But, right now they had to pass to somebody. It's been Amon-Ra St. Brown. If I see a few nice games out of him early next season, he's going to probably leap further than he will today just because, we see a lot of end-of-season guys just kind of show up and win some people some fantasy championships, but they're not that guy the rest of their career. And I'm skeptical on a guy in Detroit suddenly showing up for 3 games who's a late-round pick and connecting, and all of a sudden he's actually really good. I don't know yet. I'm willing to invest in him, especially since he's young and, if you do hit, you're going to hit for a while. But is there a real big difference in my mind between him and Christian Kirk? Not really, if I'm being honest. They're kind of the same.
Okay. Go ahead, get your other player in before I get mine, Ryan.
Jacoby Myers has seen a lot of volume with Mac Jones at quarterback. I know he hasn't had the touchdowns, so to speak, but do you think that this volume will generate into him being ranked, maybe into the next tier, that yellow tier, perhaps, with the right around the Corey Davis area?
I'm not high on Myers simply for the fact of, Bill brought in a bunch of wide receivers this past offseason. They haven't really done anything. They kind of were never expected to do anything from a fantasy standpoint. But I don't really think that that's a front office that wants Jacoby Myers to be the wideout one for a guy like Mac Jones. I think they want someone else who's just a little bit better of a physical specimen. As big of a knock as it is for me to say that when I'm not a physical specimen at all. Me
neither.
I don't foresee a guy like Myers holding value. He's been good this year. He should have more touchdowns than he does, but I can't bet on him being good going forward in a dynasty world. I will bet on someone else rising up in that offense, and he's kind of stuck in that tier. Maybe things look good at the start of next season and he slides up to the back end of the bottom tier. But he's pretty much a guy who someone else in my league is going to like more than I will. And I'm very okay with that. And it's just not a position that I want to bet on.
Okay. You got Tyler Lockett on here, relatively high in my opinion. I just want to hear your thought process on Tyler Lockett.
What's funny is as I was putting these together, I kept going, I'm going to get wrecked on for having Tyler Lockett too low. That's what I thought. I thought he was too low. I kind of want to put him a little bit lower, mainly because I do not believe in that Seattle offense. I kind of want to drop DK Metcalf down. I'm not convinced that Russ will be there, and I'm not convinced that there will be anything there next year in terms of fantasy relevance, especially, DK Metcalf obviously will be rosterable. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I don't like the future. I don't think it's very good. Tyler Lockett sitting where he is he's just been a model of consistency, and he more or less has my benefit of the doubt to be the guy who gets thrown to if a new quarterback shows up and just is, a lost child out there. He's going to be the one getting some targets over DK. Again, I'm kind of guessing in that whole tier, that 30 to 55 tier is a lot of, if you like one guy above another guy, you can take him. I'm okay with that. I'm not really going to complain, even though that's a 25-person tier. There's just a lot of kind of question marks there. I think Lockett holds value right now while Russ is in uniform. But if Russ were to leave, which is not my bet, but what I think may happen, I think it's very close, a 50-50 coin flip. Lockett's going to see an even heavier drop, and he might drop a tier even. I guess the sky is kind of falling in there, and he might just frankly be a little overvalued.
Yeah, that's how I felt about it as well.
Yeah, I actually agree with that a lot. But I have no more. All right, what about you, Bill?
I know I'm good. Jim, we want to thank you. You got anything else for him, Ryan?
No.
Okay. Yeah. No, Jim. Thanks so much for coming on. We love doing these fantasy shows. We did an entire draft on here one time. And we pretty much what you just did with us. We ran through pick by pick what we felt about the pick, if the person was too high, too low, and it was a really nice show. We got a lot of good feedback. So thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate you. As Ryan has told you in the email, we're up and coming. We're getting started. So every guest is awesome.
More than happy to be on with you guys. It's very fun, and I love dissecting my rankings. And in a weird way, my favorite thing is when I get pushback, because it makes me go, maybe Tyler Lockett is too high, and things like that. You want to be able to have constructive discussions, because every person has different thoughts on rankings. You guys do, I do, all the people watching do, all the people not watching do. Everyone thinks something different, and you want to know what the consensus is, so then you can really know where you can find value within a draft. So I put mine out there. I get people disagree. I get people who do agree. And you just want to see what other people think, because that helps you figure out how you should think.
Yeah, exactly. But that's going to do it for us here on BSing Sports. The Eagles are on here in the next few minutes, so we're going to go. Fly, Eagles, fly, and you guys have a great night. Have a good one.
Yep. Jim, stay on. I got a question for you.